Hey folks, good morning. Thank you for joining us today. We're going to just give folks just one more minute to log in before we get going. So we're really glad to have you all here. We are live, so if we have not frozen, if you don't hear from us for a minute, we're just hanging out, waiting for all the registrants to pop in. Looks like people are still logging in. So thanks for being here, and we'll get started in just a minute. And thanks for all the notes on the sidebar there. Jeff, Stacy, Douglas, and Michael, it's nice to see you all here. Good to know your faces off screen. We can't see you, but we certainly appreciate you joining and learning about what we're up to these days. All right, I think I've seen a little bit of a lull in people joining. So we'll go ahead and get started and walk through our demonstration. So welcome. My name is Stacy McBride, and I'm Director of Marketing at Pivvot, and today I'm your webinar coordinator. Should you have any questions or have anything you need, Stacy Milheiser, that's funny. But I will be the person to follow up with you and schedule private demonstrations or answer questions after today's events. So thanks again for joining us. Before we jump into the content, I'd like to go through some housekeeping items. So all of you have been muted. We appreciate that you're here. If you'd like to ask a question, please use the tool at the bottom. Many of you have already found the chat tool, which we appreciate. But if you'd like to ask a question, please click the button, ask a question. We are going to be asking some polls today, and the functionality for that's a little wonky. When we launch a poll, you'll just see a little bubble appear next to the word polls. We just ask you to click on it, and the question will display so that you can participate in the poll. We are recording today, so please share with your friends after today. I will send out a link to everybody on this call who's registered and who is present. And if you'd like to share internally with folks in your organization, we would greatly appreciate that. And we will be sending out a webinar after today to ask you about things like content and, you know, how good Rich and Colby share their information and how what you think of our platform. This is a new platform for us, so we're excited to be using Crowdcast and trying out something new. So I'm going to introduce Rich and Colby to you, your speakers today. Colby is our Senior Director of Product Development, and he's the brains behind our products, really. Everything you see today came from Colby, and he guides our product roadmap to meet industry needs and client objectives. He has over 20 years of software consulting, product development, and solution implementation experience, specifically in the energy sector. Today, he'll be explaining who Pivvot is and provide an overview of our solution, as well as launch our polls and talk to you all about what your pain points and needs are. Next is Rich Henry. He's our Director of Customer Success. Rich is every client's best friend when it comes to joining the organization. As customers come on, he oversees our onboarding, customer support, and implementation. He really helps customers find solutions to meet their unique needs. He has over 14 years of experience in the energy sector as well, primarily in GIS software and data services. Today, he's going to walk through a demonstration of our software and show you how it works and help explain the value of our tools. So I'm going to pass the baton over to Colby, and he'll get you guys started.
Good morning, everyone. Glad you guys were all able to join us here this morning. I'm going to start with a quick introduction of Pivvot here, and then also sort of a poll and what you're going to learn, and then we'll jump into a demonstration with Rich. So first of all, introducing Pivvot for those of you that don't know us. We're a team of technologists, GIS software people that have that have been, building these analysis and data sets and software applications inside of existing energy verticals for years, and supporting siting, permitting, and development of infrastructure projects. We have experience with massive amounts of GIS, location-based data, and how it supports these siting projects. We also have the discipline to curate and manage these data sets so that you don't have to, ensuring that these data sets are complete and up to date, so that that's not something that you're worrying about, and you can focus on the activities, the higher value activities of actually picking the best locations for your projects. And then finally, we're going to use that same know-how that we have years of experience with and just expand our capabilities into these new markets. Renewables are certainly becoming a big thing for our country, and we want to support that work and help that transition towards a new market. So with that, let's move on to our first poll. And so down in the bottom right, you're going to see the words poll, and you're going to see a little red 1 next to it that will allow you to participate next to the poll. And generally here, what we're thinking about is, what are your pain points with respect to siting? For example, sometimes people have a difficult time getting a tax map boundary data just from the county assessor, or maybe the data set that's coming from the county assessor just isn't really all that conducive to siting, right? Sometimes people are stuck running the analysis second or third or fourth hand because they don't actually have access to the analysis tools, and they're left to rely on others when that happens. So it looks like we've got a couple of votes in here. We'll just hang out for a couple more minutes, but certainly, availability of data and data collection is certainly a big problem here for the people that have participated, and that's certainly something that Pivvot will be able to help you with a great deal. We're going to bring that data to the table so that you don't have to. Not only the analysis tools, but also we're bringing the data with us so that you can focus on the siting activity itself. Okay, Stacy, I think that we've kind of run out of participation here. Let's go ahead and move on to the next slide. So as far as what Rich is going to demo today, generally what we're going to show you is a significantly reduced time on slide selection, thinking about all of the steps that are required with respect to data gathering and the analysis and so on and so forth. We're going to show you a workflow that you can walk through in a matter of minutes that will get you from essentially knowing nothing about an area to getting you a list of potential landowners to contact. We're going to minimize the number of landowners that you're going to deal with through what we refer to as our smart parcel data. It's been greatly enhanced for specifically this use case, so that in theory, the number of landowners you're going to be dealing with can be minimized. We're going to run constraint analysis very quickly here on thousands of acres to help you understand permittability and also constructability. And finally, we're going to present this workflow in a way that allows all of you to interact with the system rather than having to have some specialized skills. We want everybody to be able to participate in this workflow and not have to do it necessarily second or third hand. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Rich. He's going to walk through an extremely quick workflow here and show you how you can get quickly to the end game. And then after that, he's going to start back at the beginning and go through a ton of the detail that's associated with it as well. So Rich, go ahead.
All right. Everybody can see my screen. We're good. Okay.
Yes, we can see it, Rich.
All right, thanks. Good to meet you all again. Thanks for attending. Thanks for participating in the polls. That information is actually really helpful to us. So we look forward to seeing some of your comments on the remaining ones. As Colby mentioned, I am literally going to take a few minutes and blow through the workflow here. And the scenario is really, you're in the driver's seat and you're not listening to someone trying to, yap about every single button that they're clicking on, right? We just want you to get a general appreciation for the workflow. And then again, in a few minutes, we'll circle back and slow the conversation down. So what we're going to do here, right, we're inside the siting application. We're going to start prospecting here. We're going to start with Lincoln County in Oklahoma. So we'll go ahead and search for that. And we're going to set that county as our target, right? And this county has roughly 25,000 parcels. So already we've gone from 148 million parcels down to 25,000. We're going to jump over here to the siting criteria, and we're going to look for opportunities that are 450 acres or larger. And we're going to refine our criteria here just a little bit further, and we're just going to look for opportunities that are within a mile of the substations within Lincoln County. So we'll go ahead and fire off the search. Very quickly, we're going to get back. We have 14 opportunities in this county that meet our searching criteria. I'm going to go ahead and go through these really quickly and just review them, right? We're going to conduct a very, very high level kind of desktop review. We can see this first one, not a candidate. All right, so we're going to go ahead and skip this next one. The commissioners of the land office, we'll go ahead and skip that. And we'll jump down to Jimmy D. We'll come over here, take a look at the satellite imagery. We can even toggle on the terrain map for that area to start to get a sense of the topographical relief of that area. We'll jump back to the satellite imagery. We're going to come over here, toggle on a couple of the pivot layers. So we'll turn on wetlands just to start to get a sense of some of the environmental conditions on the land there. And we're going to take that property and add it to our project, and we'll talk about projects here shortly. And I'm going to scroll down. We're going to bounce over to this other property here and take a look at it. We'll go ahead and add that to our project. We're going to skip these state lands here. We'll go ahead and browse this McGowan Enterprise. Also looks like an opportunity. And then we'll just add these other two so we have just a few records inside our project. So from here, right, we've reviewed those, we've added them to our project. We're going to kind of take this conversation to the next level, right, which is to understand what the usable area is, right, which will help communicate to us what is the potential of this property. So we're going to open up our constraint configuration. We're going to review our setbacks here, and then we're going to go ahead and calculate that usable area. So we'll give that a few seconds to populate. All right, we can see very quickly we went from 1,700 acres down to 933, and then we'll go ahead and map that so we can see it on the map and just start understanding what are the opportunities on that particular property, and we can do that for each one of these. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and pause. Right, again, the intent here was drop you into my seat for just a few minutes and walk through that siting workflow without being hampered by someone like me yapping in your ear about what button I'm pushing. So we're going to pause there and shift it back over to Colby.
Thanks, Rich. Stacy, let's go ahead and bring up that second poll. And really our question here is, how long does it take you guys to find sites? Again, down in the bottom right of your meeting window, you'll see that polling question. So you can just pop that thing open and vote on one of these things. And I think the point here is when you think about the data collection that's required, the size of some of those data sets, even downloading some of those data sets can take an immense amount of time. When you think about the spatial querying that Rich just did, tell me all of the landowners inside of a county that are over some amount of acreage, those spatial queries can take immense amounts of time. And then also the geoprocessing that Rich did. Right, basically erasing a polygon by constraint layers, right? That geoprocessing can also take enormous amounts of time. And so finally, if you think about, kind of all three of those steps in concert with each other, getting access to the data, filtering it so that you can find the places that are preferential to you, and then finally doing some of that geoprocessing, certainly it can take immense amounts of time. And, he walked through that very, very quickly. And allowed you to then focus on, getting closer to the end game and getting into the details quicker, so that you wouldn't have to worry about some of those more mundane tasks. Looks like from our polling perspective, we're kind of in the hours to days time frame, not a lot of weeks out there, which is probably a good thing. We'd probably be a lot slower to make this transition if that were the case. So, Rich, I will hand it back to you to go through some of the detail with respect to siting now.
All right, sounds good. All right, so this is part two, and this is where the yapping is going to come into play now. All right, so what we're going to do now in the next 25 minutes or so is slow this conversation down. right? So we're gonna, now that you have an appreciation of what the sort of general workflow is, now we're gonna actually discuss some of those features and some of the details. We're gonna start with the different approaches for prospecting opportunities. From there, we're gonna talk about how we can review those sites, right? We have several pieces of collateral that will help you get a little bit deeper when you're evaluating the sites. And then we'll move the conversation into how we can actually modify a site, right? Some sites are going to grow and contract, right? We want to walk through that workflow with you. And of course, we'll spend a little bit more time on usable area calculation. And then we'll kind of wrap it up again with some of the other kind of ancillary deliverables that are produced from our platform. So with that said, we're back in Lincoln County, Oklahoma. We're going to zoom in up here to the northeast corner. And as I start to zoom in here, you'll start to see some of the pivot layers appear on the screen, right? So we've got the power lines here. You can also see some of the substations. So in that first part of the demonstration, we searched for opportunities at the county level. We narrowed that down just a little bit. Give me 1 second. I got to close this blind. There we go. Thanks. The life of working at home. So we narrowed that search down a little bit based on opportunities that were near substations, right? Substations in the entire county. What we want to do now is kind of approach it from a different perspective, right? We want to approach it from some of the existing features, some of the points and linear corridors that we have inside our data set, right? So specifically, we're going to do a search here on substations. So I'm going to click on the map here, pull back one of the substations. We can expand that information, start to review some of the attributes about it, and then we're going to go ahead and set that again as our central location. All right, this is going to be our starting point. So we're going to go ahead and zoom out just a scotch here, and then we're going to come over to our siting criteria. And a lot of the little bells and whistles here, you guys, are probably very, very familiar with. But there's something here that's a little bit unique. What makes, I believe, our platform unique, and Colby touched on this, right? There's a couple ways that we think about our data, right? There's the information that we go out and curate nationwide at the state level, at the county level, right? That information is what we bring into our data set and make sure that it's up to date, right? That's on us to do, right? Which removes a lot of the headache for you all. And then we have another way that we think about the data in our platform. It's not actually ours, it's yours, which means that you guys can actually take your custom data sets, right? Some of you guys are entrenched in certain regions. You guys have gathered information that might make you all a differentiator. You might have, more granular data in a particular location that we just quite frankly don't have and may not have, right? You can upload that information into the system and start leveraging it. Right, so that's another aspect. And then the third way is actually enhancing some of the data, right? We have truckloads of information at our fingertips, right, that we can start using to our advantage and to your advantage, right? So one example of that is taking some of the soils data and identifying where there's hydric soil, right? So we can enhance our data set from that perspective, which means that now, from a construction perspective, that's going to be very helpful for you. Another example is this smart parcel idea, right? So what we've done is we've taken all of the tax map parcels that we have for the United States, right? Tax map parcels being that legal boundary, right? The boundaries that you guys are probably familiar with, the information you download from the county GIS site. We've taken those across the entire nation and looked for opportunities where we have properties that are literally touching each other, right? That are adjacent to each other, that have the same landowner name. And we've aggregated those into one opportunity, right? And this came about from talking to our customers where they said, look, we want to find opportunities, and then we want to find opportunities where we have adjacent landowners that are the same landowner that's adjacent to each other. So we're not talking to multiple landowners. So we've gone through the legwork of creating those opportunities, and we do this every single time we update this parcel layer. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and leverage those smart parcels. And then we're going to come over here and actually modify our search criteria. And we're just going to look for opportunities that are 150 acres or larger. And we're going to go ahead and tune down some of the search criteria here because I just want to focus on opportunities around that substation. And so we'll go ahead and kick off that search. And we're going to zoom out here just a little bit and we can see what those opportunities are, right? And over here, we've got 10 results, right? So we can come over here and start identifying which one is that opportunity and which one is, this, who's the landowner here, et cetera. Okay. All right, and then we would enter into kind of that desktop review and how do we assess these sites and so on. We're not going to do that just yet. What we're going to do now is just approach it from a different perspective, which is we're going to come over here and actually leverage this transmission line as an opportunity to start prospecting. Okay, so again, we're going to come over here, set that as our central location, right? Again, this is our starting point. We'll come over here and refine our search a bit. And this time I'm going to reduce the distance down to basically opportunities that coincide with that transmission line, right? Those opportunities that have that transmission line on the property. And we'll go ahead and kick off that search. And again, very quickly, we're coming back with 16 opportunities that we would now start reviewing and taking it to the next step. Okay. One last approach, and I think this one is very relevant, not only to prospecting for solar siting opportunities, but for those organizations that are going to conduct due diligence on a property. They want to understand what the usable area is, maybe for building a warehouse or something of that magnitude, which is to be able to come in and literally just pick a single parcel and then potentially have that opportunity kind of grow out to other opportunities next to it. So we're going to zoom in here just a bit. And we're going to go ahead and click on this option over here, and we're going to use Ronald as our starting point. And then from here, we're going to go ahead and keep the criteria as is, and we'll go ahead and kick off our search, right? And this allows us to get this single property as our starting point, okay? And what we're going to do is we're going to use Ronald's property here to kind of start walking through the remaining pieces of the workflow. Okay, so from here, what I want to start talking about is how do we start reviewing this property? How do we start leveraging the data inside the platform to take this kind of siting and prospecting opportunity a little bit further? So what we're going to start out with is, and we saw this earlier in that kind of part one overview demonstration, which is, again, we can come in and take advantage of the terrain map that Google provides us so we can start to see some of the relief in the area, right? Of course, we're going to leverage Google's satellite imagery, right? This is something that we all know and trust and we're familiar with. And that familiarity is actually really important to us, right? Colby touched on this, which is, the usability around our platform is really important to us, right? Which means that there are lots of different folks inside your organization that are going to or can participate in leveraging this platform, right? It's not just for that person that's going out and prospecting for that site. It may be other folks, right? You may have BD folks, you may have program managers, you may have engineers, right? We want to build a platform that helps support all of those different disciplines. And in order to do that, it's got to be simple and it's got to be familiar, right? So at this point, I'm not doing a whole lot of activity here that you probably haven't already done in, for example, Google Maps, right? Clicking on the map, getting information, toggling things on, getting information, right? Panning around, etc. So with that said, what we're going to do now, right? We've leveraged the satellite imagery. We can see the terrain map. We're going to come over here to our layers flyout and start taking advantage of some of our data. And not from just a tabular perspective, but I want to see things on the map, right? I want to do an actual desktop review, before I have to send people out to this property and put boots on the ground. So from here, I'm not going to go through all of these. You guys can kind of get a sense of what we have here, but we can turn on things like depth to bedrock, right? So we can see very quickly, what is the depth to bedrock in this area? Where is that transition? As we continue to scroll down here, we can turn on things like existing pipelines, right? Do we have pipeline in this property? Do we need to think about that? Who owns that pipeline? Who are we going to have to reach out to if we're going to do work on this property? All of that information is going to be available to you. As we continue to scroll down, of course, we have things like floodplains, right? You can see we have floodplain activity up here in the top right, not on our property. That's a good thing. And as we scroll down, we have things like land ownership, potential conflict. And again, this is at the federal level. So if there's any tribal land in an area or any federal property that's adjacent to your property that may cause you some concern, we'll have that information. You can see that immediately, right? We have other information at the state and county level, right? Opportunities or things that may be detractors for a particular site. And as we continue to scroll down, we have information around the streams, water bodies, and wetlands, right? All of these represent potential obstacles as you guys are evaluating the site. You're going to want to understand not that you can see them necessarily, right? But how much of that total site is actually encumbered by by those features, which is kind of where I want to take this conversation now, which is let's move away from kind of this subjective desktop review of this site and move it towards something that actually you have metrics in hand. Okay, so what we're going to do now is jump up here to a parcel report, and we can generate this parcel report for all of our properties, right? So you'll have these for each of your sites, and this is again something that gets produced in literally seconds, right? So having all of this information available to you and having it at your fingertips really quickly is important. Okay, so let's talk about the details a little bit about this report, right? This first page, of course, is just high-level information: who owns the property. Of course, we have a nice visual here of what is on and around that property. But this next one is kind of a yes/no checklist, right? We have certain items here in this report which can we can add things or remove things depending on your workflow. But right now, it's a quick gut check on what's happening on the property. Do we have substations and transmission lines that are within proximity of our property? Yep. Do we have any floodplains on this property? Nope. So that's good. And then similar information around wetlands and flow lines, et cetera. And then we have some information down here about slope suitability, right? So again, this gives you that quick gut check. And as we scroll down through these pages, we start to get in a little bit more detail, right? A little bit more detail around that property owner. And as you guys well know, right, you guys have gotten information from a variety of counties, right? It depends on how much information that county will provide you. We run into that same challenge, but suffice it to say, you have some of the basics which will allow you to reach out to these property owners, send out your notifications, et cetera. And as we continue to scroll down here, right, we start to see information around those substations, right? What substations are within a certain proximity, and we'll give you that mileage, right? So you'll start to understand, who owns and who operates those substations, who you'll have to reach out to. Similar information around transmission lines. And as we continue to scroll down, right, when we did our desktop review, we knew we didn't have any floodplains, but if we did, we'd start to see information around acreage, right? So for example, here with wetlands, how many acres of the different types of wetlands do we have on this property? What is the % coverage, right? All of this you can start tallying up in your mind, whether this property is going to be something we want to pursue or not. Again, similar information around water bodies and flow lines. And as we continue to scroll down, we'll start to give you some actual numbers around the slope on this property, right? So we can quickly see, not necessarily in the image as much as we can see with the data down here, that roughly 90% of this property is conducive for solar siting, right? It's anywhere between 0 and 10%. That's a good thing. And then we can continue this conversation down with land cover, right? You start to get a sense of the different land cover subtypes that exist on that property. And again, you start to tally, right? Are we going to have to cut down forest in order to do that, right? What's the expense for that? Or in this case, we've got 92% of this property is grassland and pasture. Again, looking really encouraging. All right, so we're gonna jump back over here into the siting application. I'm gonna take a couple steps backwards so we can move forward. So at this point, what we've done, we talked about the different approaches, but we've picked this particular site as kind of our starting point, right? Ronald is a friendly, okay? He's already said that he's interested in leasing his property. So we'll go ahead and pick on that site. We've conducted our desktop review. We've leveraged the data from a mapping perspective so we can see the activity on the map. Then we took that a step further, generated that parcel report. Now we have actual numbers around that particular site as it relates to environmental information, as it relates to that property owner, and some of that topographical data that helps us make a decision. From here, what we're going to do now is we're going to actually start getting a sense of what is the potential of this area, right? What is the actual usable area on this property? And again, that'll start to kind of get some of the numbers churning about what the solar potential is. So we're going to bounce back over here to the siting dialog, specifically the constraint configuration, which lists out all of the setbacks that we have available in the application. I'll just share with you now that list continues to grow, right? We're going to start to see things like existing pipelines, existing power lines, oil and gas wells, right? So that list will continue to grow as we have conversations with you all, quite frankly. As we scroll down, right, you can see things like the land cover has an option here, which allows you to refine your usable area calculation from this perspective of what land cover subtypes do we want to include or exclude from our usable area, right? Everything over here on the right represents areas that we don't want to include in that usable area calculation. And a similar conversation around slope, right? Anything between 0 and 10%, thumbs up. So we're going to go ahead and kick off our constraint calculation. We'll give that just a couple seconds to run, and then we'll map that information so we can actually see it on the map, okay? So now we can see where our opportunities are on this particular property. I'm going to go ahead and zoom in just a little bit. I want to highlight a couple things that I think are pretty relevant. And I just also want to just show you that what we configured over here in the setback is in fact working, right? We can see around these wetlands and water bodies that we actually are taking into account that setback. We can see it here that we're taking into account this access road to this property. And then one other thing here, which I think is fairly unique to our system, is that we also have building footprints, right? Structures for the entire nation. And that's not to suggest that we have every single structure represented in the country, right? You can see here we have a barn not represented. This data set is a huge moving target, but we do have really good representation of structures in the US, and we can take that into account. One other thing that I want to bring up, and I want to highlight something that Colby said, which is, again, trying to take this conversation as far as you can before you have to hand it off to folks like your technical resources, right? Trying to not distract those folks from doing the work that they're really good at and they're focused on, where you can stay focused on trying to help take this conversation further. And so as an example of that, we're going to come over here and just quickly modify the setback around our transportation features. In this example, that access road. And we're going to go ahead and modify the setback around those properties. And again, update that usable area. We'll give that just a second to churn. And we can see very quickly that now you, right, have the ability. Peggy, you mentioned earlier in your text or in your IM over here, relying on others as somewhat of a pain point, right? We really appreciate that, because at some point you will have to rely on your technical resources, your engineers, your GIS folks. But for this sort of activity, right, you want to be somewhat self-reliant. You want to be able to move this needle as far as you can, right? In maybe your current situation right now, in order for you to go and readjust those setbacks, you'd have to go talk to your whoever, right? Give them that new criteria. They'll queue it up in their work, do the work, and hand it back to you, right? We're trying to take that conversation out. All right. With that said, from here, right, we can see that usable area. What I want to talk about now is, again, sort of moving that needle, right? So the scenario here is, we've talked to Ronald. We've said, look, you've got a site here that's got a lot of potential. You can illustrate that to them. And Ronald's like, that's really cool. However, I don't want you to use this western half of the property. I'd like you to focus on this eastern piece. And then during that conversation, Ronald shared with us, or maybe you did your due diligence and reached out to some of the adjacent landowners, and you found out that the owner of this property is also interested in leasing their property for renewable efforts. Okay, so let's talk about how we can modify that site, right? And by we, I mean you, right? Something that you can do very quickly. All right, so at this point, I've started editing my site. I'm gonna go ahead and click on this side of that property and go ahead and remove that piece out of the equation. And then I'm gonna click on the one over here on the right and add it, right? Earlier on, we talked about how, some of these sites, they may grow and contract depending on conversations you have with that landowner. Well, you can support that workflow inside the platform. And we'll go ahead and save that, and then again, rerun that usable area. And now we have an updated perspective on what the opportunities are on that particular property. And again, all we're doing is clicking a few buttons, right? So that usability piece is really important to us. Okay, so what I want to do now is talk about some of the other collateral that we produce. And I also want to use that as an opportunity to talk about, what are the workflows downstream from here, and how do we help facilitate that, right? We know that, a logical next step here is to start to understand where we can actually rack out the arrays, right? Which is going to also help us understand what the solar potential is for that piece of property, right? That's not something we're doing right now inside the application. Certainly on the table to consider, but this is where you're going to need to hand off this usable area, right? This feature off to maybe your engineers or maybe your GIS staff, So how do we do that, right? How do we propel this conversation forward and not keep you hostage within our platform? So from here, we can take this usable area and we can download it into a KMZ, right? Super common format, very common to use inside AutoCAD, very common to use inside GIS software, and very common to use inside some of those niche solutions that will actually go in and start racking out those arrays and calculating that solar potential, right? So you can download that, share it with others. To kind of build on that, let me talk about some of the other collateral that we're producing to help you evaluate these sites, okay? So a few minutes ago, right, we identified this site, looked at the terrain map, right? We turned on some of the pivot layers and we got a sense of what's going on the ground. We generated that parcel report. Now what we want to do is kind of take that conversation, take that reporting to the next step, right? Because we're not boxed in here with just that parcel report that has a half a dozen features on it, right? We have lots and lots of other data that pertain to, you know, the geotechnical makeup of an area, right? The environmental constraints in that area, the socioeconomic perspective, and then also the property data and some of that topographical information. So I want to start walking ourselves in that direction, okay? So one of the other pieces of collateral deliverables that we produce is actually a permit report or a permit punch list or a permit matrix, however you refer to it. But what we've done for every single site that you produce, right, we can quickly create this punch list of federal permits that pertain to your site, right? So you don't have to go out and do that work. So what we're looking at here on this page are all the federal level permits that would pertain to the work that you're doing in a specific location. All right, we're going to identify whether that particular permit was triggered or not. We'll highlight what from our database triggered that permit. And then we're going to take that a step further and actually identify the agencies that you're going to have to reach out to and submit that permit to, identify the region or district that you're working in, and then again, list out that particular permit. And then we're going to take that even a step further and actually describe to you that statute and regulation, and then again, identify that very specific feature that pertains to that permit. And so I'm going to bounce through a couple of these pages here so you have a sense of what we're talking about. Okay. All right, so from here, right, we've talked about the parcel report. Now we talked about the permitting report. Now we're going to get into the actual pivot report, right? Full meal deal. Everything that we have, everything we know about your particular site. And again, this is something that's generated in minutes, right? We took that first poll a few minutes ago, and you guys were, you know, in the ranges of maybe days to hours, right? And so what we're talking about here is the ability to go from, again, nationwide data set down to a handful of opportunities, calculate that usable area, start to understand what's happening on the ground, start to understand what sort of federal permits you're talking about, and then now let's get into the, you know, the full meal deal reporting, right? To a level of where you can start conducting some due diligence. I'm not going to go through each one of these, right? As I scroll down, you know, you'll have a feel for this. We can certainly share, you know, at a much deeper level, what sorts of data we have inside the platform. But suffice it to say, you'll see information around here around boundaries and around jurisdictions, right? All of which starts to help with the conversation around permitting. Who are we going to have to reach out to, right? Who is the electrical retail service territory that we're going to have to contact when we're doing work in this region? Who is the energy regulatory region of this particular site? As we kind of scroll down here, we'll start to see information around the geotechnical composition of the area, right? What is the depth of bedrock? What are the geologic units? What is the karst topography in this particular area, right? What is the slope composition of this area? And as we continue to scroll down, we start to get into some of the environmental constraints that we've already talked about, right? We've talked about floodplains. How many floodplains in the area? What's the acreage of that, of those records? And as we continue to scroll down, of course, and we've seen this already, around flow lines and water bodies and wetlands. As we continue to scroll down here, we can start to see who are the property owners, either that make up my site or are in proximity to my site. And I'm going to use that as an opportunity to kind of jump down here on the bottom left, right? So right now up in front of you, we can see this summary report. Down on the bottom left is where you can actually get into the details and start nerding out on all the individual records that help build this summary report. And I'm going to use that property data as our starting point. So down here, right, we can quickly see how many property owners are going to be impacted by my site. And then down here, we have each of those property owners listed out, their owner name, mailing address, et cetera, and whatever attributes that we have associated with that. And this information, right, can be exported out to a spreadsheet. So in essence, what we're doing is creating that notification list for you. So if you need to reach out and notify these property owners, you have that information available to you. And as we scroll over, right, lots of different attributes here. And all the way towards the end, we have what we kind of append to each of these data sources, which is things like acreage impacted, right? And so that's where, again, we're kind of enhancing these data sets to help bring value to you as part of our data analytics. We'll just kind of bounce through a couple more of these, right? So wetlands, we start to get a sense of the different types of wetlands that exist on our property. You know, do we need to be hypersensitive to all of them? Maybe not, right? We get to decide. We can see exactly what types of wetlands we're working with here. And then down here in the bottom, right, we can actually start interacting with those wetlands, you know, with the map as well, right? So, you know, we'll give you that tabular information. We'll allow you to have some of that interactivity with the map over and above what we already talked about earlier. A couple other features here that might be worth mentioning, right? There we go, percent slope, right? We talked about this in one of our other reports, but again, you can have this information. And this is where we're starting to, you know, what our hope is starting to kind of bridge that gap between, you know, the information that you can gather and the information that, for example, your engineers are going to need, right? So you can start sharing this slope information, right? As part of the deliverables, we will also kind of package up this information as a surface, as a raster, or as a file that you can pull into your GIS or your AutoCAD environments that will describe the elevation surface and will describe that slope surface. Because again, we want to try to bridge that gap between, you know, the folks that are doing the prospecting and the folks that are going to have to take this to the next level and work it from a modeling perspective or a technical perspective. And so, to kind of build on that, as part of each one of these sites, what we're going to do is package up all of that pivot data that we've been talking about, right? We're going to package up your floodplains and your wetlands and your property data and the bedrock and so on and so forth. We're going to package that up for each of your sites so that you can hand that off to your GIS folks or your AutoCAD folks, and so they can go in and start creating those exhibits and taking that information and working those various models and workflows that kind of take place. And so, you know, when we talk about our platform, even though we're very focused on siting right now, that is not the end of the story with this platform by any stretch of the word, right? The platform will support, you know, you just simply coming in and just taking advantage of the data, right? Come in and extract information from the platform and use it in your own workflows, right? If you don't want to use our siting, that's okay. Leverage the data, right? Because we've taken away a lot of the headache around curating that information and keeping it up to date, right? So if you just want to leverage it from that perspective, you know, have at it. But, you know, we want to kind of really think of this as a collaborative platform and something that applies to a lot of the disciplines. With that said, that's kind of it. That's all I had for the demonstration. I just want to kind of wrap it up with just a couple more comments here. You know, as part of the demonstration, right, we first had that quick overview that took us from basically 0 opportunities to a handful of opportunities, including, you know, understanding what the potential is by calculating that usable area. And then the last 25 minutes or so, right, we did a little bit of a deeper dive, talked about the different approaches to accessing or prospecting for opportunities, whether it's from, you know, from an existing substation or existing power line. And then we move that conversation and how do we actually review it, right? What are the different pieces of collateral that we have in the platform that will allow us to review it from a subjective perspective to a much more analytical perspective, having those actual numbers in hand. Then we moved into how we can kind of modify those sites, right? As the conversation evolves with landowners, those sites might grow and contract, right? And then how we can quickly, without relying on others, update that usable area and then start moving that conversation, moving that needle to the next workflow with the ability to kind of export out these reports, export out the data, and share it with some of your more, you know, technical resources, your engineers, for example. So with that said, Colby, back to you, man.
Rich, thanks for the great walkthrough of siting on the Pivvot platform. We're going to roll out one more polling question here, but maybe before we do so, I'll remind you guys, down at the bottom, there's a link for asking a question. We are going to address questions here in a moment. Frankly, at this point, we don't have any, but we also did have a couple kind of lined up that typically come up in these types of demonstrations. I do see one question as well in the chat that we'll get to. So again, if anybody's got questions, please go ahead and you can put them in the chat. You can put them in the Ask a Question section. We'll find them either way. So with that said, then we have one more poll here. That's really just talking about, how are you currently working through this workflow? And maybe while this poll is up, I'll also just kind of remind everybody that, Rich walked through citing in the Pivvot platform, but there are other parts to the platform as well with respect to citing as well, linear corridor type information. So think about electric transmission lines, pipelines, that sort of stuff. We certainly support those workflows as well. And then beyond that as well, collaboration as that project kind of gains momentum and becomes a bona fide project. Numerous collaboration type workflows in the system as well, so that all the stakeholders on that project can participate and understand sort of a single version of the truth as well. So anyways, we've got our last poll up here. It looks like we've run out a little bit of steam with respect to participation, but that's okay. We'll go ahead and address some questions here as well then. The first one that I just saw in the chat, and then I'll jump over to the question section, is where are you getting your property owner data from? How often is it updated? We're getting it from another vendor in the property database space. There's 6 or 7 of them there. It's updated on a rolling basis. So I don't remember exactly, but we're pulling in, on the order of 50 to a couple hundred counties a month, and they're constantly being updated. And then in addition, beyond that, we're redoing that geoprocessing with respect to sort of aggregating that information to help you understand how many landowners you're going to be dealing with. So that's constantly being done over time as data is updated. I also see a question here around cost for accessing the tool. We did not discuss that, and we'd be happy. In this case, it looks like it was Catherine that asked the question. We did not discuss costs, and we'd be happy to do that on a person-to-person basis after the webinar is completed. So we'll certainly reach out to you. Does the system allow for application beyond solar for hydroelectric applications? Certainly, I can't say that we have a ton of experience in the hydroelectric space. With that said, you saw Rich did a great job of walking through a number of the data sets that we have at our fingertips here. We have a lot of experience in some other energy verticals. And so I guess, Doug, it might make most sense to reach out and let's get in touch about that and kind of understand what your use case is and how we could support that. I'm going to jump over here to the questions section. We have a question here. Can you share projects and sites with other users? Is it secure? Certainly, you can share stuff. You have the opportunity to share your siting projects with other users within your organization. And you can invite users to your organization as well if they're not already existing users in your organization. And absolutely, it's secure. We do require sort of a username and password to log into the system. Although one of the common questions that we get is, "Oh, you're using Google Maps; it must be public." It is not public. Everything that you do will be contained within your account, and then you can share within that as well. We have another question here. What kind of distributed transmission data do you have? Is your transmission data proprietary or pulled from external resources? It is not proprietary. We do pull it from external resources. It contains, typically those higher voltage lines. So you're going to see a ton of transmission information in there, and then also some distribution feeders as well. There isn't any data in there that's essentially from the street to the house, certainly, or even at the local neighborhood street level. We don't have any of those distribution lines as well. So mostly feeders and then transmission lines. Let's see here. Rich asked a question. I wonder if this was Rich that did the demo or a different Rich. Rich asked the question, does the parcel data have phone numbers associated with the landowner? In a great deal of cases, it does. certainly landowner name, phone number. Sometimes it also has land use codes, that sort of information, addresses, contact addresses, and site addresses. And frankly, it depends, right? I mean, to be completely honest, there are some counties in the United States where we don't even have parcel data. It just depends on really what the county is capturing. And it looks like those are all of our questions.
Those are all the ones I saw come through.
Okay.
And
just checking the chat here as well. Yeah, it looks like we're good.
yeah, and everybody answered the questions or asked the questions that typically get asked during a demo. So the ones I had teed up don't even really need to be addressed. I'm just going to throw my email up here as we shut down today. Colby and Rich, thank you so much for joining us or for walking us through this. I hope that all the folks on the phone got an understanding of how we can, expedite and streamline your siting processes. We have a lot of developers and friends who work at EPCs on the call today, and I'd be really curious in your feedback. So please keep an eye out for that survey. And if you'd like to get into the weeds and talk further about what we do, please send an email to me at smcbride@pivvot.com. It looks like maybe one more question has popped up in there, Colby, and we have a couple minutes here before the end of the hour. Do you want to take that last one?
Yeah, it'll be hard for me to take. I assume ESG is environmental, social, and governance, but I don't think I understand the question with respect to data layers for tax or ESGs. Maybe if we can quickly get a comment in there, and otherwise we'll certainly take that one offline and address
Follow
it.
up. Yeah, Rich, you may be able to mention how we've uploaded opportunity zones when it comes to those tax benefits into the system.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, that became a pretty hot topic over the past few years. And so that was just another opportunity for us to get that data set and upload it and make it available inside our system. And another one that's kind of on the queue for us is around environmental justice and social vulnerability. Again, that's another pretty hot topic. So, I think that's a really nice opportunity for us to say that, what we have inside the database is not what we're going to have next week or next month or next year. Right, we're very eager to have these sorts of conversations and look for these opportunities so that we can grow our database. So thanks for asking that question.
All right. So thank you all again for being here today and starting your morning with us. We hope you have a great rest of your day and keep an eye out for communications from me. Thanks, y'all.
Thanks, y'all.